So if you've ever listened to a politician speak about foreign policy, you've probably heard the idea that we need to bring our troops home and focus on our domestic problems before we start looking all around the world. And while this makes for a good soundbite, and it certainly feels good emotionally to say that, oh, we're bringing our guys home and we're going to keep them safe and keep ourselves from getting involved in some sort of huge, endless war, the situation is a lot more complicated than that, as it usually is when we're dealing with politicians. And as the several historical examples show, which I'll get into later. So for background, the United States maintains 800 military bases in more than 70 countries around the world, although some of these bases are not officially acknowledged, so those numbers are estimates. And these numbers did decrease substantially following the withdrawal from Iraq. And for sense of scale, Britain, France, and Russia combined have only 30 overseas bases. And if you included all of the bases and military forces we have in active war zones, they cost somewhere between $160 and $200 billion, and that number is rough because, again, a lot of these things are classified. The most common framework that these bases are placed under is NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it tends to be the target of a lot of the attacks on foreign policy and our involvement in treaties around the world. And this alliance primarily consists of European nations, although they do have partners in many other places in the world, as this map shows. And it primarily serves to counter Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. But the most important part of this alliance is Article 5, which states that all the member nations will regard an attack on one of them as an attack against all of them. And the only time that this has been invoked was when NATO aided the United States in our invasion of Afghanistan following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And one of the most common criticisms that's used to attack NATO and other alliances by extension is that other nations don't live up to their spending commitments. And what this refers to is the commitment by all member nations to commit 2% of their gross domestic product to defense spending, and that at least 20% of that spending will go to major infrastructure improvements as well as research and development. And this helps the entire alliance because it increases the forces that would be available if they were needed, and it decreases the alliance's reliance on any single nation. So if they didn't honor the Article 5 commitment, the rest of the alliance would still be able to do better than if they relied on any single nation. And only Estonia, Greece, Poland, the United States, the United Kingdom, Latvia, and Lithuania meet the 2% target as shown in this graph here, although several others have increased their spending substantially in recent years. But it's important to bear in mind that the alliance still provides value, because if all of these nations spend any money at all on their national defense, that still provides the alliance with more military power than they would have if it didn't exist at all. And it's not as though the United States maintains a large military simply for the use of NATO. We would have it either way, but it greatly benefits us to have it within a framework that gives access to all of these other countries and their resources in a time of conflict. And the other most commonly cited figure is that the United States makes up about 67% of NATO's military defense spending, but this is because the spending is based on GDP, not because the other nations are just slacking that much. And because the U.S.'s economy is so much larger than that of Lithuania, it makes sense that we're spending a lot more money in just absolute terms than a lot of these smaller European nations are. But easily the most significant reason that NATO needs to continue to exist, and all of these other alliances, is that they put these other countries under the umbrella of nuclear protection. And this helps to decrease the total number of nuclear weapons in existence, because each nation does not need to have their own nuclear weapons to provide a deterrent. And this decreases the possibility of some sort of nuclear accident, because there are just fewer weapons that something could go wrong with. And it also makes it less likely that terrorists or criminals will get their hands on nuclear weapons, because there are many fewer of them in existence, and the countries that have them are generally more developed and able to maintain robust security around them. And I hope that we can all agree that it would be a worst-case scenario if a terrorist or criminal was able to get their hands on such a destructive device. And it also decreases the odds of a nuclear conflict, because if fewer nations have those weapons, then it's less likely that they will use them in a conflict, because they just won't have that option. These alliances also provide a number of other strategic benefits, as analysis from the RAND Corporation has shown, because these bases enable us to be more responsive to sudden crises and events in other parts of the world, because we're quite simply closer, and so there's less travel time that you'd have to account for in a response to some sort of major incident that threatens U.S. lives or interests around the world. They also enable joint training operations with other militaries that enable us to work more closely with them and decrease the sort of deadly, potentially damaging incidents that could occur if you weren't used to working with other militaries. And it makes it easier for the Navy to maintain supply chains for their ships all around the world, which is essential for protecting U.S. Commerce and business interests, and which has direct effects on both the U.S. economy and national security right here at home. And it also helps to reassure our allies to have physical bases in their countries, because it makes it much harder for us to just up and abandon them if we have a physical presence there. And so while I absolutely understand the desire to avoid unnecessary conflicts, it's simply impossible in the modern day and age for the U.S. to remain truly isolated in the world. And a premature withdrawal from the world stage, as we did in Iraq with our withdrawal from that country, can have disastrous consequences, as we saw with the rise of ISIS, which was enabled by the power vacuum that was created following the U.S.'s abandonment of that country. And the best way that we can hope to stop threats to our national security is by fighting them overseas before they reach our shores with comprehensive alliances.